Hey guys, welcome to my Tyranno Hassleberry Deck profile. Good old Dino DNA! This is a really easy one as we know almost everything in his deck, so I only had to add a couple of cards. Now let's get into it. Starting with the monsters, we have the only vanilla Sabersaurus. There's little to say about it. It's a 1900 attack beater. Not much else. Next is the first Pringle, Archaeonus. Hassleberry never actually used this thing's effect. It was only ever a way to get big dinos out, but if you wanted to poke for 300, you could. Next is Baby Cerosaurus. This wasn't nearly as good back in the day as it was a lot more difficult to proc its effect, and there weren't many good targets for it. Next is Black Stego, a good way to wall up against attackers, provided they don't have piercing. Next is Dark Triceratops. It's basically a smaller blade edge, and the artwork is a bit graphic, but could have been worse. Next is Dark Tyranno. Why they called it that when there is literally another card with black in its name in the same deck, I have no idea. At least they changed the name when importing it. Next is Destroyersaurus, one of the discard to search a field spell monsters. The field spell in question isn't anything special compared to its successor, but it can also be a beater if needed. Next is Dynabase, one of the early non-spell fusion cards, at least as far as I know. Next is Elementsaurus. Since Hassleberry had no fire monsters, this card was never getting the attack boost. If it had access to the Evol archetype, it would have been different, but I don't believe those were around in the GX era. Next is Giant Rex. It's a low-level, high-attack monster with a big drawback. Pretty common in the early days. Now, not so much. Next is Gillosaurus. Not something you want to have past your first turn unless you've made sure your opponent has nothing to summon from their graveyard. Next is Hyper Hammerhead. Not the best form of removal, but still effective. Next is Sorabeast Brachion. Way simpler than the real-world version that was released way later, and not really worth the effort to bring out. Next is Superconductor Tyranno. While not an amazing structure deck boss monster, at least it doesn't have a summoning restriction like some of the earlier ones. Next is Tyranno Infinity, a pretty decent comeback card if you've managed to get enough dinosaurs banished. With later support, that became a lot easier. The final monster is Ultimate Tyranno. Despite the name, it's really not all that great, although at least the anime version doesn't stop you from attacking with anything else. Moving to the spells, we have Big Evolution Pill, a decent way to get high-level dinosaurs out, but still really vulnerable. Next is Card of Reversal, very much a comeback card reliant on your opponent having a built-up board. I have to wonder what they would change if they imported this one. Next is Card of Variation, it's Pot of Greed with a cost. No way this can be made real without major changes. Next is Dino Blast. If you used this with one of your big dinos, that's a hefty chunk of damage. Next is Dino Stomp. Not the quickest MST, but it is still back row removal. Next is Earthquake. This was to combo with Dark Tyranno, and it's basically death for most Cloudians, but that's about as far as its utility goes. Next is Jurassic World. It had its effects changed during the anime. Its originally buffed dinosaurs and winged beasts made them immune to the opponent's traps and let you switch them to defense if they were attacked. Now it's just a buff to dinosaurs. Next is Living Fossil, a watered-down premature burial, but still better than the real-world version we got. Next is New Ultra Evolution. Considering that Hassleberry only had one target for this card's cost, it's a miracle he never bricked on it. Power of Writing. Next is Pot of Greed. What does it do? Nobody knows. Next is Space-Time Transcendence. Depending on what you'd want to summon, you'd need to build up your graveyard for a while first. This obviously pairs best with Tyranno Infinity, but not being able to attack straight away is a real hindrance. Next is Tail Swipe. It's okay removal as it can remove multiple opponents' monsters, but it does need setup. Next is Ultra Evolution. Nowhere near as good as what we got later on, but arguably the best way to get out Superconductor Tyranno. The final spell is Ultra Evolution Pill. Hassleberry never actually used this card, but we know he had it because it was shown to be in his deck when he dueled Sartorius, and given that he did have it, this implies he had a reptile in his deck that was just never shown. Moving to the traps, we have Amber Pitfall, a pretty good way to protect from attacks, but it would be useless now due to Lynx running around. Next is Counterattack. No idea why they had to include the exclamation mark. I have no idea how you would use this outside of pairing it with something that both was battle immune and had an effect that triggered off being attacked, but the artwork's pretty cute, a bit of a homage to Tom and Jerry. Next are 3 cards: Fossil Excavation, Jurassic Heart, and Seismic Shockwave. These were shown during the Season 3 ending. Since they were, that means Hassleberry did have them. Next is Hunting Instinct. It is a bit specific, but another good way to get your bigger dinos out. Next is Jurassic Impact. You ideally want to only use this when you don't have anything to be destroyed to avoid the burn damage, and the summon lock isn't great, but it could be an ugly surprise when unexpected. Next is Survival Instinct, another one that was changed over the course of the anime. It originally let you banish dinosaurs from your graveyard or hand and gave you 500 life points for each one banished, but the current version is still pretty good. The final main deck card is Volcanic Eruption. It's hideously slow but somewhat effective, and it was one of the best ways to trigger Baby Ceratosaurus. And that's all of Hassleberry's main deck cards. Here's what I added. First is Gaga Gigo. It's not the best fit given its water attributes, but it's sort of dinosaur-like and gives a target for Ultra Evolution Pill. The next and final card is Survival of the Fittest. It basically makes all dinosaurs into Tyrant Dragon, and the attack boost is really nice. Moving to the fusion deck, we have Dynatank. It's a real shame this has to be summoned with Dynabase in the anime, as pairing this with Power Bond could cause a lot of damage, but the targeting protection is great. And that's it for Hassleberry's deck. I'm a big fan of dinosaurs. Maybe not as much as I used to be, or as much as dragons, but it's a beefy deck that can really lay the beat down if played well. As always, please rate, comment, and subscribe. Don't forget to follow me on X, consider backing me on Patreon, and remember to stay chilled.